Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today. This is a lead dev online panel discussion created in partnership with ChainGuard, so thank you for that. This discussion will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the panel Q&A. But for those of us that are joining us live, I've shared that link in the Slack, but the truth of the matter is we want to hear what you have to say. So you can use the Q&A in Zoom or in our chat if you have questions, comments, and things. We really want to hear you live. That's the privilege and our gratitude to you for joining us live. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, do ask them throughout. And if we don't have any more, we will in the Slack community. So today, it's very interesting because we had a recent conversation where, or a different of these webinars, where it seemed that the hardest part was that everyone had a different definition of agents. But what's interesting, especially when you talk to people that are in the open source world, it doesn't really matter how you define things, because as frameworks and best practices start to emerge, it should work for most things. So I think that makes it kind of an interesting follow-up today. So today we're talking about how do you make security and quality continuous in your agentic lifecycle with the pressure of right now. How do you plan for this rate of change? What's your individual company's appetite for risk? Should we trust these things? So yeah, these are a lot of questions. So as we're going to have our speakers introduce themselves, I'm going to throw up a poll, which is just asking those live, do you think you work for a well-regulated industry? Definitely, some parts are, and now we're free of constraints. So we'll see how that goes. And then Priya, I would welcome you to introduce yourself first to our audience. Thank you.
For sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Priya, and I'm a director at ChainGuard, where I oversee a lot of our new products focused on securing different areas of AI and CI/CD. I've been a big part of the open source community. I've been lucky enough to do it as part of my job for a number of years now, and been a maintainer on the Sigstore projects, Tecton, Minikube, and Scaffold, to name a few.
Okay, yeah. And by the way, if you are relying on open source software, open source is not actually free, and please do pay people to pay your employees to contribute back. If you're relying on it, you need to. Joseph, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Joseph Sandoval. I am the managing principal product manager at Adobe, working on our infrastructure platform and everything from API gateways, Kubernetes, observability. And outside of that, also active in open source and participating in two roles with the CNCF, the CNCF End User Technical Advisory Board as the vice chair. And as well as just recently, I have joined the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee. But today I'll be really speaking from my Adobe persona and like my day-to-day.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Natalie, you're next.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Natalie Vlatko. I'm a director of open source software engineering at Cisco, where I help lead the open source program office for Cisco, which means we have our fingers in a lot of open source pies for the specific organization. And as is no surprise, one of our top strategic priorities is AI. And we in the OSPO actually do a lot of work with a lot of different business units, and we're specifically involved in helping projects, models, and data sets get out there in the world. And a lot of our focus is on security and risk. So I'll definitely be speaking from that part of our experience today. But I'm also a Kubernetes maintainer. I've been in the Kubernetes ecosystem for quite a long time. I'm co-chair of the Special Interest Group for Documentation. And I'm also a steering committee member of a group called the To Do Group. And that is a group stands for Talk Openly, Develop Openly. And we're a group of open source and OSPO professionals where we get together to try and set standards and create resources for all other different companies and areas of academia to use to be able to start the journey of their open source program in their enterprises or academic institutions.
Oh, it's so important because, again, we need more people involved in open source. So before we continue onward, so our audience, our live audience, asked our kind of tricky question, or was it tricky? I don't know. Do you think you work for a well-regulated industry? About almost a third said definitely. A little over 2/3 said some parts are well-regulated, and one cheeky person said, nah, we're free of constraints. So that is our response. So since last time we realized that there were different definitions of agentic AI, I, being a journalist, love a definition. So I want to ask, what do we mean by secure by default? Natalie, do you want to go first for this? Like, let's try to create a baseline definition of secure by default.
Interesting. I wonder if I'm the right person to go first because to me, agents are a vast part of agentic systems where there are actually several different layers of security that are worth really thinking about. And we want to talk about areas where we think of, for example, general AI security, yes, but content safety or your life cycle scope of your agent, or maybe you're going into multi-agents and tooling that way, or multi-modality is another area too. So unfortunately, I'm the complicated one that actually ends up giving you a specific secure by default can be tricky, especially on the regulatory and baseline standard side.
When you say regulatory, what makes a company well regulated?
Oh, I would think that that could take on several different layers and features, but specifically, a lot of different specific technical standards are at a baseline, coordinated with and aligned with a lot of regulatory frameworks as well. And so I think making sure that you're trying to adhere to known technical standards is one step in getting specifically aligned with the regulatory requirements as well.
Okay. Priya, do you want to add your definition of secure by default, what that means?
Sure. I mean, I think kind of like Natalie said, there are a lot of different layers to secure by default. At its core, I think focusing on the developer is usually a good place to start. And how can you build tools and infrastructure that allows a developer to do their job, and security is just sort of baked into it to the point where they don't have to really think about it. Like they can just build features, fix bugs, do what they want to do what they do best. And the tooling and the infrastructure has been set up such that those things are following best security practices and are thus secure by default and are enabling people to do their best work without having to worry about security at every step, or figure out what the right way to do things are at every kind of point of the software supply chain. But yeah, there are a lot of different tools out there. Supply chain itself is like vast. There are a lot of different steps to it. And so the secure by default approach at every step, I think, needs to be a little bit different or tailored to what you're trying to do.
With this in mind, Joseph, like what are companies challenged with today? Are companies that worried about security? Or are they just trying to go fast and realizing they're not going fast?
Yeah, well, I think there is definitely some tension. It's just trying to go fast, like there, and rightly so. Like this has really fundamentally changed our industry, and everybody's trying to react. And when I think about like what you just, both my panelists said about being secured by default, and if I look at these things, like, I would think in this manner that, my role is to really make these things easy to consume, and that's the safe, acceptable way. Meaning, not every developer using my platform should, have to remember the right prompt, the right policy, the right approval pass. And then there's probably like a lot of like things I think about, like how do I do these things to make these things secure as people are going fast. So, scoping permissions to make them short-lived, don't giving broad access, a clear separation between, a human identity, a service agent identity. Now the big thing that we're moving fast on is we realize that all the infrastructure that we used to use was built for a certain type of workload and a certain type of persona. Now we're sandboxing things, and we're like, and agents need its own computer, like because it has to manage its own secrets, and it's accessing tools, and it's getting to the network. What can it touch? So, I think about these things, and it's like, when I think about like secure by default in itself, it's like it's not telling you just please behave. It's the platform making things safe, and that's the default path for people.
For people and for agents?
Agents as well. Yes, correct. Yes. That new persona that we have.
Yeah, typically it's interesting because sometimes we have this new persona, though maybe persona is a bit like personifying it a bit. But uh but what we found so far is when we do the right practices around documentation security, clarity of roles, tiny batches, microservices, et cetera, it is like the things that were always good for human-led software delivery tends to be very good for agentic-led or agent-led. Maybe not led, agent, so agents in the loop. Maybe we don't want agent-led software delivery, but yeah. Okay, so what has this done? Like, what are the expectations now? Do we want agents to do all the work?
I mean, I think the expectation, as far like at least the way I feel it, is that we do move faster. Like I think there definitely is an expectation that now that we have agents and we have this new technology, we should be able to move faster and get more things done. Whether or not we actually are moving faster and getting more things done, I think is like a different topic. Probably something we'll talk about like later in this chat, I'm sure. But yeah, the expectation is like we should be able to do even more than we were able to do before. And I think it's interesting because thinking about how to build things securely can sometimes feel like you're slowing yourself down when like the kind of the I don't know what we're being told this is to move faster and faster. But I think that's where secure by default really comes in, right? Because if you take the time to figure out how to make your system secure by default at the beginning, you're actually more likely to, you're going to enable everyone else who uses that system to move as quickly as possible later on. And you're severely like de-risking yourself and like the risk of something going wrong later on, which will probably end up saving you time in the long run. So I think sometimes there's this feeling that, you know, thinking too much about security or planning for it upfront might not be the fastest path, but it actually is the fastest path because it will probably like save you later down the line.
Yeah, totally. This idea of, secure by default, you're building in predictability so that there is that trust with your agents too. And I think that's something that's really important because we talked about personas before. It's not a person. It is this system that still sometimes are doing things or accessing things that maybe it isn't supposed to. And so I think really thinking about this idea of it's less about tagging on security and making this an extra task and more about building in predictability of this tool set that you're running with and working on. And I think that that's something that we value in ourselves in a lot of the work that we do as builders and tinkerers too. And so that we get this time, if we do want agents to do everything in our different use cases, to be able to work on the things that agents aren't predictably supposed to do, like thinking of new ideas and new problems to solve.
Yeah, I know that in what I'm seeing a lot, not in just in my role, but I'm also seeing in the community that I'm around a bit as well, is just that, we've kind of moved beyond and when we've seen this evolve with how we're engineering, which has accelerated things. So I think a lot of it started from the earlier just prompting, and then we just like, hey, it's the context, context is needed, the harness is important, and now you need to be looping and now we're working towards like dark factories. And if I look at like the things that I'm tactically contributing to working on, we've kind of moved from, hey, let's build the thing that builds the thing. And we've had to really think about that because now we're saying, hey, let's step out, let's let the agents do all the coding, do all the work, and they just kind of keep going in this cycle. And we're going through a lot of like challenges about like where are the gaps, where are the holes, and especially with like as the models are getting better, like we can't see all those kind of like those blind spots that we have. So we're just assuming zero trust, and even with that, we're like, can we strip things down even more, like, and taking even the things that are industry standards and trying to find ways to harden even those things. So can we, Gvisor, and then how do we embed that, and how do we make sure that where these things are living inside there, it can't access anything else. But it's really forcing us to think about it because we're stepping out a lot of things. We realize we can't read every line of code. We will probably do some check-ins in there here and there, but then, how do I make sure that the outputs I'm getting when we build these factories that I can trust them and feel like they're providing secure outputs? And if they don't, we go back and try to figure out like, well, why didn't it do these things? But these models are challenging to work with. I'd like to say like in a lot of our work that everything has been, hey, great, we get it's smart, it's catching these things, but when we've relearned a lot of little lessons. So it's really caused us to be cautious in our approach and how we're designing and architecting these kind of like infrastructure tooling.
Okay. I have an audience question, and to lead into it, I think I'm going to ask our next poll because I have a question from the audience I feel might tie in, not to imply. But the question is, do you have a compliance strategy for your AI or your agentic AI? A lot of companies maybe don't distinguish those yet either. And the optional responses are, of course, no, in the works, or I don't know, not my area. So with that in mind, I want to ask the audience question of, well, just somebody's asking for basics. What are the basic security principles for AI agents? So let's popcorn. What do we got?
I can start. So specifically at Cisco, we have worked to contribute to this really great standard for AI agent security. It's called AIUC1. And in the resources specifically for this webinar, you'll be able to find some information about this. But this specific standard is very much designed to be customer focused, adaptable, and transparent. And also very forward-looking, and that word that I mentioned before in my last answer, this idea of predictability and to be predictable as well. And Cisco is super excited to have been able to contribute a lot of technical work to this standard that is meant to be operationalizing emerging AI frameworks that are coming about. And so what does that mean? It means that basically it's helping to address a lot of enterprise concerns around AI security, and it's being developed with MITRE and as well as MIT and Stanford and a lot of other companies like Google Cloud as well, alongside Cisco. And it builds on other AI frameworks from the regulatory space specifically as well. So you're looking at the EU AI Act as one area, but also the OWASP Top 10 for agentic AI and LLMs, and the NIST AI RMF as well. So this is something that is really worth thinking about in the context of, imagine you had SOC 2 compliance for AI agents. It really kind of works in this way. And so this is going to be something that we believe on the Cisco side is really beneficial for a lot of the kind of compliance work and standardization of AI agent and agentic security that's going to be taking place more and more so across a lot of different companies. And if we can all gather around a specific standard and use a lot of the same standards, then our desire and ability to make these systems more trustworthy and more predictable is really going to be elevated. So I wanted to kind of put the standard out there first as like the first step of what I believe on the compliance and regulatory side we want to be aiming for.
Wait, so that's a good point. So with SOC, for example, is there any consideration of agentic AI in any of these important financial institution and other existing regulation, like GDPR even?
So
like we know the new regulation, but what about the existing?
Sure. So the AIUC1 is not meant to duplicate SOC 2 compliance or GDPR, but it's definitely meant to complement, for lack of a better term, as well. Because agentic is so evolving, it was definitely seen as a standard requiring its own work and merit there. And especially because of the regulatory climate, it needed to build off of a lot of the different convergent areas, with OWASP, with NIST and CISA and so on, to be able to help get all of these disparate yet connected bits of information and data joined into this one shared technical standard that has actually been contributed to across a lot of the big AI and agentic players as well. So it's definitely not supposed to be a duplicate of SOC 2 or GDPR, but built upon other very intertwined regulations and standards too.
Absolutely. Joseph, I see you nodding along.
No, everything that I think Natalie gave is like she's a subject matter expert there. I would probably double down on exactly the things she said. I think if I had to like look for standards and frameworks of reference, I think she kind of nailed them all. But I think there's an ISO standard on the AI management systems, NIST AI risk management framework. I forgot about one that I know we talked about, like links, but I think there's the EU AI Act as well that has emerged that I think, is used for like regulatory pressure, the risk categories, governance expectations. I'll try to link that in here in a second, but those are the things. I don't deal with the compliance in my day to day. I just get told what to follow. But these are the things. If I was really trying to explore those things, what Natalie mentioned, and then maybe the additional things that I've mentioned that we're going to share as links.
Yeah, I think also as a note there, this idea we spoke a little bit about risk before, and some of these regulations and standards that are coming in, and you might hear, NIST and CISA that are kind of from different kind of parts of the globe and like an EU-based act. And I think it's really important to know that a lot of the systems that we're working with and developing don't have a specific home only in one part of the globe. They are really global, and a lot of these regulations will mean that they will impact you regardless of where they are specifically from in the globe too. So that's really important to note. But then on the security side, there's going to be hopefully this convergence on being able to do conformity assessment for high risk systems, that are specifically AI based. And this is something, this idea of appetite for risk, where we get to choose what that is in our projects, our companies, our foundations, our academic institutions, and so on. And so what those risks could be and what our appetite wants is where we can actually differ in terms of our application of this work.
And I would just say about the EU AI Act, even if you don't have customers or aspiring customers in the EU, which I find unlikely, that's one of the reasons why we think you are all working for a well-regulated company. Easter egg. But it's just, I think, a really interesting way to think about everything and to open cross-organizational, cross-functional discussions on what is an unacceptable risk band, what is high risk. It could be healthcare, law enforcement, HR, critical infrastructure. What is limited risk, maybe systems that interact with humans like chatbots, but that have basic transparency, and then minimal risk, which maybe it's like a spam filter or things that we've come to rely on in more traditional AI, like our emails filtering that none of us want to get rid of now. But I think thinking about that is very good. So just to look at the compliance strategy of our audience right now, about 13% said, of course, they have a compliance strategy. About 20% said no. About 67% said in the works. So I ask, because things are so quickly changing, and we've been in cloud transformations for what, 12 years now? It feels early. So how can we regulate, or how do we respond to this rapid change? Priya?
Sure. I think change is gonna happen. Things are changing so quickly. I think it feels hard to keep up for everybody. And I think it goes back to a lot of what Natalie and Joseph were just talking about, of taking some of these frameworks for security, picking out the bits that are relevant to you and important for you, and then figuring out how to apply it to your system. I think the best thing to do is just get started and start to figure it out, and then make like iterative improvements over time. And as new things come out, you might have to shift slightly or pivot. But I think just starting from a baseline level of security is important. And I think a lot of AI agentic security is also just core security principles that you should be thinking about, not just in terms of your agent, but in general, right? Like in general, you should be giving things least privilege permissions, reduce access wherever possible. Make sure you have audit trails so you can see what these tools are doing. You can go back and kind of like deduce what happened if you need to. And so I think like the frameworks they mentioned, there are other frameworks out there just for generally securing like your infrastructure, your supply chain that you can use. And I think that's a really good place to start, because things probably will change, and you probably will have to like change how we do things as more information comes up. But I think yeah, just starting with a baseline level and getting started is probably the right thing to do.
Okay. So let's, Natalie, you had mentioned, because we did have a lot of questions about looking for like or in the server we sent before about like practical examples of what companies are doing now. And we'd love for you to tell us about how it's working at Cisco right now. I think you have a responsible AI team.
We do. So on the releasing of any kind of open source project or AI-based project or data set or model, we definitely have, especially if it includes what we call an agentic loop and that kind of technology, we want to make sure that the responsible AI team is involved, specifically also on the data set side as well. There's a lot of, I am not a lawyer, but there is a lot of work on the legal side, on the data set area that we have to jump into. But in general, our responsible AI team is the one that is combing through the idea of what is Cisco's desired risk versus us working fast, appetite in the ecosystem, what this actually would do in the larger product landscape for Cisco, and so on. And specifically, Cisco has a lot of different product areas when it comes to our AI offerings, but also security and defense too. And so we have Foundation AI, which is looking at a lot of the different models that we release. We also have Cisco AI Defense, which is actually specifically scoped to quite a lot of agent and MCP security as well. But then we're also looking at model and supply chain security. And then we have it's a great open source software that we've recently released called Agency. That's part of the Linux Foundation. That specifically is infrastructure for multi-agent work and multi-agent systems. And so for us, that compliance piece has to work alongside our desire to get out this amazing technology out to the folks that want to use it, but also out to our customers who want to utilize it too. And we've definitely seen on the open source end, it actually makes a lot more sense for us to partner with a lot of the different companies that are out there doing similar things, working on these kinds of standards. And so our responsible AI team is also getting in tune with that and also making their own processes quicker to meet that exact need. What used to take weeks and weeks because the knowledge was a bit sparse, we hadn't done a lot of those kinds of reviews yet, is now able to be quicker because we're able to not only prioritize the work that we're wanting to do, but we're also able to show in the ecosystem what gap we are feeling in terms of, is it security based? Is it model based? Is it certain data sets that we want to make available as well?
So it's interesting that you linked the open source with your AI processes, because do we find like a lot of companies are doing that, or because they don't think they're risk because they're not paying for it or whatever, it's not getting tracked into their compliance loop? Or does does open source tend to be more compliant?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I want to state first that this idea of open source AI, while our definition does exist, I don't think it's overall, let's say, supported or agreed upon across the industry just yet. And so there's this idea of, firstly, you have models that might use open source licenses that are originally applied for and specifically for software. But then you have the idea of open weights and open models as well. That works differently. And then the data layer of this part is treated a little differently too. And so I actually don't think the compliance part is easier. I think it actually unfortunately gets a little bit more muddled. And that's where on the regulatory and compliance side, we actually need to catch up, because there isn't, well, maybe if we had this discussion 6 months ago, maybe there wasn't a standard yet. And we're literally working on these systems as the standards are being created. So I think there is, partly to answer your question, part of it is I think folks don't know and companies don't know where to actually begin on the compliance end because it is a little bit murky, but there are places to start. And the OSI does have an open source AI definition. We do have technical standards around AI security with the AIUC1, and we do have a lot of other different companies who are trying to get together and understanding that because despite specifically Priya's great examples of what you should be allowing your agents to do or not in terms of permissions and so on, things are still possibly happening. Vulnerabilities are still getting created, and the security layer is more important than ever. So our focus on our end, on the compliance end, and also the open source side, is actually the security layer specifically.
Is there not a pushback against open source though? Because people are like, well, we know it's not free. Most enterprises figure that out, but can't we just use AI to build it? Is that more or less secure as a tactic?
Well, I have a lot of opinion on this. I would love to hear from my fellow panelists.
I feel like they all do. So please dive in,
I
Priya.
mean, I feel like you could use AI to like rebuild everything from scratch. I don't know that it maybe you feel it's more secure because, only you can make changes to it, but is it also correct, I think is where some of the issue comes in. And most likely the model is just it's just learned from whatever is out there in the open source as well. So really, how different is it going to be to what is in the open source? I think the benefit you get from open source, which you've always gotten, is like a lot of eyes on a project, like a lot of people kind of working together to make sure it works in a specific way. And that can provide some confidence that, it does what it's expected to do. Trust is a complicated topic, right? Like, can you ever really completely trust anything? Probably not. So then you just have to figure out like what do you trust the most and like what is the lowest risk to you and what are you the most comfortable with? And then there's a trade-off between risk and maybe like, moving fast and getting things done and having confidence that the code that's being generated is actually going to work and do what you want it to do. Um, yeah, I think it's hard to answer this question because it's so situation dependent and kind of something that everyone needs to decide for themselves.
I think the term situation dependent makes sense here because people think like,
Mhm.
what's your risk? Because you're, I don't know, a bank or something. And like they assume
Yeah.
every bank has higher risk, maybe, I don't know what could be low risk because we think everyone's regulated, but like a store is lower risk. But both of those industries have a lot of financial data, a lot of HR data. We look at like, well, HR is not facing the public, so it's not as important because it's an internal tool, but actually it's facing the public and it has a lot of data. So there's a lot of nuances to what is your risk appetite for anything with data that is personal information, et cetera.
It
Joseph?
also
Oh,
it
go
also
ahead.
depends on where you're located. Sorry to interject.
Yeah,
When you
please.
mentioned
Yeah.
like an online shop like Commerce, for example, in the UK, a lot of the AI-based law or regulation is actually linked to consumer law and data protection law specifically there. So which is very much linked to on the commerce end. So that's something that's also can be quite tricky. So I just plus one to everything Priya said.
Yeah, and somehow I still need to dive into this, but I read on LinkedIn, so hopefully it was true, as I go on the record now, that the UK has established that Amazon and Google and Microsoft are now financial entities. So they'd have fall under a different regulation than they would have a week ago, things like that. Joseph?
Now, this is all, good feedback from my panelists. I think just from my perspective, I know that there was two things that were touched. First, Natalie, you hit really the funny thing that I always kind of wrestle with like open source and what's open source and AI, like that's a whole like landmine of a conversation. But I think to like where Priya is at, like, opens AI has opened up opportunities to kind of like, yes, could we build or take from open source and make things that are our own? But there's a lot of cost to these things. We're also subsidized a lot. I think the reality is we're going to start to hit areas where these decisions are going to cost. So there's a financial component to these things. I think you're going to have to weigh out like, do I want to own that whole supply chain? I think that's why a chain guard exists because they solve a lot of the cool problems that I don't want to deal with. And the acceleration of, now we're finding vulnerabilities and security holes and with like Mythos really elevated this and I think you really got to question like a lot of the risk factors that are in there. So for me, it's really coming from a less from a regulated or industry perspective, but more of just like platform pragmatism. of like, what do I want to own? What do I rather have somebody else own so I can kind of limit my blast radius or the risk of things that I own?
Okay, absolutely. And that could change as there's just more code being created. So there's more tools being created and everything. So you have to pick and choose, I guess. So as we look to finish off the answering the how to build trust into your AI agents, should we trust them? They are not people. Should we trust people? But what sort of guardrails and security checks need to be built into your agentic flows? Popcorn again, if anyone has thoughts. What do you need to build in there? Now, may change.
I mean, I'll talk about something that's, really emerging, upstream, but becoming critical in, you know, open telemetry has become a real key thing, so like how do I observe what's happening? And, it's really having its moment. And, we're seeing like projects within it, like the, semantic conventions that allow us to then to start tag and have the insights into like how things are behaving. I think that's becoming really critical so that you can, quickly understand like why an agent did something, or, I can audit these actions. And so for me, I'm seeing that being a key part of whatever infrastructure, however you're building your platform, telemetry has to be instrumented in there, so that you can have all the insights.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah. Big plus one. I think at the end of the day, like, and it's not even sometimes a matter of trust. Like, where people make mistakes. Sometimes you just accidentally do the wrong thing. Sometimes, it's reasonable that same thing will happen with agents. So it's impossible to build a system that is 100% secure where nothing will ever go wrong. And so I think putting in the guardrails of like, okay, if something goes wrong, like, do I have the information needed to figure out what happened? Like, do I have the tools in place to try to roll it back or to make sure it doesn't happen again? And so I think that's where like the telemetry and the auditing really comes in. And then, yeah, I mean, I keep going back to the frameworks, but I think that's probably like the best place to start with, like, minimal permissions, a secure supply chain. There's too many things for me to list right now, but they'll cover all of them, which is why they're helpful. And yeah, just try to start on like as solid of a foundation as you can.
Yeah, I think I'll only add after plus one to everything that Joseph and Priya said. Uh, you know, uh, this idea of trust, you're architecting that trust within an agent, and thinking also possibly backwards from, let's say, you're on top of looking at the frameworks. What is it that you think a malicious actor would want likely access to, through these workflows? Data is obviously a big one, but if you're looking at this idea of trust, trust usually comes with being able to identify something, and like the identity management of agents is also something that's worth highlighting and underpinning here. And a lot of open source projects definitely look at this too. A malicious agent is likely unidentifiable by your workflows and your systems. So identity management, I would think, with the telemetry and that observability is also something that's key here to instilling trust.
I really like that term, architecting trust, because we say with humans and all about building trust, but architecting feels like we're taking a step back from. Trust is also not a word I really love because we're adding a lot of human-led language to our agents in a way that's concerning, because I think finally, I've been touting for like 3 years now, one agent does not equal one human. So you need to find, maybe we need a whole new slew of vocabulary, but there's just a little journalistic rant. We have an anonymous question of how to solve for logging and mapping caller identity, for example, HI, to NHI MCP agents that includes prompt response and other metadata. This question hits on trying to solve identity training. Joseph, I think you want to take a stab at this.
Yeah, that's a good one. And this is something that a lot of this is just evolving, but I would model this as like a delegated action chain that the human identities kind of starts the intent. The agent identity then, will execute inside a scoped session, and each MCP or tool call will carry that chain forward. And the logs should not just say, hey, the agent called the tool, but it should show like who delegated that task and which agent acted, because it's probably a slew of them doing different roles. What permission did it have? What prompt or context drove it? What policy decisions were made, and then, what changes happened after in whatever that targeted system may be. So, if the audit trail can't distinguish the human, the agent, an MCP server, any other downstream system, then you don't have accountability. So you'll just have like a pile of logs, and believe me, I have that. But I think that's kind of how I would start with this. And this is a pretty long subject. I have an observability team and logging team, and I'm working with security teams and all these things. And these are things that we're still kind of defining, but that's kind of where I would start from.
Okay. As we wind down, what is something that companies should be doing today? We're talking a lot of like longer term or building or having committees, but if you're just a team, because so much of this is done not sharing in isolation, what should you be concerned about on Monday or tomorrow if you're not hungover from watching the football?
I mean, I would say I think it's important probably for security teams and engineering teams to be working pretty closely together on this. And honestly, at some point, like that would need to expand to the entire company, because agents aren't just for engineering, right? Like all roles can start using them and taking advantage of something like a cloud code. And so I think, but it really starts with like engineering and security probably coming together, figuring out like what are the guardrails we want to put in place so that we can help people move more quickly, while like limiting, the risk that we have. And I think it comes back to like the beginning of the conversation, where how can we make things secure by default so that people don't really need to give it thought? Like only the people, like a couple teams need to worry about it, need to make sure things are being done correctly. But for the most part, like everyone else can just take advantage of the tools as they want to and accelerate in their own jobs and like focus on the things that they're good at. So I would probably say like start that conversation if it hasn't been started already. And it's probably a good first step.
And continue it throughout. That's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, and continue. It's not going to end.
Yeah, I think I would probably, plus one everything Priya brought, from a platform perspective, I would, try to identify, like, as I own certain parts of my platform, and I know, and they're pretty, fixed. And then I have other teams that kind of give me identity, or, like, and who's the access, like, so I'll work with those teams to kind of see and how do I instrument these things into the platform. Parts of my platform, isolation. Well, I own that. So like, what is my strategies around, how do I secure the network, the browser, context integrity, so I'd be looking more for my security teams to help me in these areas to, help me understand like the trusted service, sources, and what's the provenance of the things that we have in there. How do, what the prompt injection boundaries, review policy, observability, recovery, all these things kind of matter. I know we covered these things in various, parts of these questions that we had. But I just kind of make a checklist and go through these things and find out what you own, where they touch you at, and start to strategically think about, if there's certain gaps, identifying those gaps and start to work towards closing them.
Natalie?
Yeah, and I think I would say finally, on top of the great points that my other panelists brought up, specifically with the collaboration, I think it's worth taking a step back and thinking about this idea from, let's say, your security team's perspective, where they don't want control of some of the work that you're doing. They want to make sure that it's safe and secure. And so thinking about it from that aspect, about building in that predictability, and understanding that that's the kind of context that everybody is coming from, as opposing to needing to restrict or shut down certain kinds of exploration of this kind of tooling and workflows in your companies and systems. And I think a lot of the standards help to try and push to that kind of mindset of this idea of everyone can get together to work on shared standards that are meant to be secure and predictable. But that also, I think my last takeaway is that the evolvingness of this specific technology area, so much new stuff is happening, so many new developments, so much new updates on the regulatory and standard side as well. I mean, even the standards that we're speaking of, they actually get updated 4 times a year. The project I work on only releases 3 times a year. So like even that is evolving at a quicker and moving at a quicker pace often than some of the well-known cloud native infrastructure that we've come to rely on today. Keep up to date with the new developments. A lot of the news is full of it, and it's worth keeping your eye on that.
Absolutely. It's very interesting because it sounds like even though people joined this call because it was how to build trust into your AI agents, but it seems like every other change, it's a people and process over tech problem. And so much of this success hinges on building trust among your teams and cross collaborating. So I'm sorry to those listening that wanted a quick fix and didn't want to have to talk to people, but if there's something I'm convinced going to happen is this year and next, what's going to differentiate people and save them their jobs is the ability to talk to other people that are domain experts in certain areas. So work on that. Good luck with that. And thank you so much, Joseph, Natalie, and Priya. And thank you to our audience. Good luck. We'll continue the conversation in Slack.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.